and constantly reminding myself, like, I am a coach. I've been a runner my whole life, and I still have to remind myself, not every marathon training cycle, not every week, not every training run has to go according to plan, because whose plan is it? There's like 80 different plans we can choose from. And so it's really learning to be flexible with yourself.
Welcome to For the Long Run, the podcast exploring the why behind what keeps runners running long, strong, and motivated. I'm your host, Jonathan Levitt. Through personal and professional connections in the running world, I have the privilege of getting to know some amazing athletes. I've always been fascinated by the psychological aspects of running and what helps people to achieve success, however they define it, and this podcast is aimed at exploring this and much more. I hope you enjoy. We are proud to share that this episode is sponsored by our friends over at Puma. Here at For the Long Run podcast, we're fans of Puma and have been really impressed with their efforts to support and foster the running community. We're excited to partner with a brand that has such a rich history in sports and that cares deeply about the running community. Puma believes that sometimes all it takes is a spark to make a change, to get motivated, or to try something new or hard. And we couldn't agree more. All we need is that small spark, and the actions will follow to get us there. With that small flicker, anything is possible. Puma running shoes offers supreme cushioning, superior propulsion, comfort, and lightweight technology. I've been running in the DV8 Nitro First Mile, and I love how it has a focus on sustainability. The shoe feels amazing, and even better, it's in collaboration with First Mile. It's made from at least 20% recycled material, as First Mile's focus is on cutting down plastic waste in production and in the supply chain by finding innovative ways to get recycled plastic into products like Puma running shoes. Check out a pair for yourself at puma.com and use the code FORTHELONGRUN for 20% off any Puma Run or Train products. When you support Puma, you support me and the rest of the For the Long Run podcast team. Thanks again to Puma for sponsoring us. We are psyched to announce a new partner of the podcast, Lauren Daniels. Lauren is a realtor helping buyers and sellers in the greater Denver and Boulder area and beyond, and has been a good friend of mine for a few years now. When I decided I wanted to buy a place in Boulder and put down roots here, I was completely overwhelmed by the home buying process. Lauren was already a good friend, so when we first talked about home buying, I felt a huge sense of relief. She's a neighborhood expert, has an incredible attention to detail, available for any and all questions, and made what could be a very difficult process super easy. And now we've got a beautiful home in Boulder. It's close to the trails with a big backyard for Alfie and views of the Flatirons. So if you're even considering buying a home in the area or anywhere, I highly recommend working with Lauren. You can reach her at ldaniels@milehighmodern.com and let her know we sent you. That's ldaniels@milehighmodern.com. Thanks so much to Lauren for supporting the podcast and helping us continue to grow, and for all those miles together. And welcome back. I have Sara Hayes joining me on the podcast today. Sara, thanks so much for taking some time to chat.
Thanks for having me, Jonathan. I'm so excited to be here and to be a part of your incredible community.
Thank you so much, and excited to have you on. The first question, who is Sara?
How deep do we want to get here?
How deep do you want to go?
Sara is a lifelong runner. She has gone through varying identities of the sport and what it means to her since she started, like most of us. Right now, she is someone that is really leaning into intuitive movement and is learning that changes in every single season of life. So she's learning to enjoy slowing down right now.
The way you said that, specifically season of life, is interesting. I love looking at different periods of running in that way. 2 years ago, I did a podcast with my friend Mary Johnson. It's a marathon on Instagram for those who know the name. And she talked about the same thing, where you can't always be doing the same thing all the time. And there are ups and downs and ebbs and flows and all this stuff. So I'm curious for you, how do you rectify that? Or what's your relationship with these different periods or seasons of running? Because I know for a lot of people, sometimes it's forced and sometimes it's chosen and sometimes it's in between.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. And I think it's you really have to get down to how curious are you with your lifestyle right now? Like, can you be super curious as to why you're doing the things that you're doing? So for me, I come from a background. I found running through just falling into it in middle school, high school. Had no idea I was good at it. And then I was a collegiate runner from there. I ran D2 up here in New York. And I didn't know it at the time, but I had a really disordered relationship with the sport. And so for me, it's understanding now that I love running. It has changed my life, but I only want it to enhance my life. I can't let it take from me what it did in the past. So I just finished. It's already 2023. That's where my mind is. I was going to say I just finished a marathon training block, but that was in October. I ran the Chicago Marathon. I hit a wicked PR for myself. I was super pumped and have not put my watch on since. Doesn't mean I haven't gone on a run since. I just am taking that space from having super a little bit more planned, rigid movement to saying, all right, it's time to take a break. And when I start missing it is when we're going to start training again. Sometimes that's a week, sometimes that's 6 months. And it's kind of just learning to be uncomfortable with that in between of when is the itch going to come back.
I love that. Is that what the poster on the wall behind you is?
It is. That's that's the Tracksmith poster that everybody loves. I'm mad because Berlin was my first and they weren't doing the pop-up there. So now I have to go back to Berlin if I want to complete the cycle.
It's an expensive poster.
It is an expensive poster. And then you got to travel with it. Like it's a whole thing.
So the sign on the wall behind you says 3:23:07. Talk to me about your, that's obviously a BQ. Talk to me about your progression to that point, where you've been running for a while and this last marathon was your fastest.
Yeah. So this is my second marathon. The first was Berlin. That was in 2019. I didn't even know what the world majors were then. I think I'd probably just got an ad for it or a running friend told me about it. And I was like, all right, I guess I'll sign up for this. And if the running gods want me to run a marathon, I'm going to do it. And I did it with the intent of just having fun, but I was like, how cool would that be, for my ego to say I BQ'd my first ever marathon. And I went about it like pretty terribly. Like I did not have a life while I was marathon training. I was thinking about my next run or my last run or what I would eat next or how tired I was or all of the things. And I ran like 3:31:30, maybe something like that. So it was like 90 seconds over getting that BQ. And it was, it was pre-pandemic. And because of that, though, I did qualify for Chicago. And so I was like, sweet, I don't have to pick a next marathon. I have the bug. I want to qualify for Chicago. And between Berlin and Chicago, obviously we went through a pandemic. But I got married and I had my first child. So in training for Chicago, I was coming back as a postpartum athlete and a business owner. I didn't have Mindful Miles at the time during Berlin either. And so my relationship with movement, again, like continued to heal, continued to evolve. And I said, this time around, I want to push the limits of what I'm capable of, but I don't want to do so in a way that's all I'm capable of. I still need to be a mother. I still have clients. I still have a business and I have a husband and a life and friends and things that I want to celebrate. I don't want to be miserable for 4 to 6 months because I'm chasing this huge goal. So that's, I think the biggest change for me in the one block to the next was really, 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 truly learning to implement fun into my training and to understand that, it's tough when we talk about intuitive movement because that sounds so like hippy dippy, ethereal, up in the air. Like, how am I supposed to reach big goals or train for things and listen to my body? And it's really learning and understanding that, okay, your training cycle doesn't have to be rigid. It has to be more regimented than most, but giving yourself room. Like, it doesn't have to be 6 miles. It can be 4 to 6. It can be 4 to 7. It can be whatever you need. And constantly reminding myself, like, I am a coach. I've been a runner my whole life, and I still have to remind myself, not every marathon training cycle, not every week, not every training run has to go according to plan, because whose plan is it? There's like 80 different plans we can choose from. And so it's really learning to be flexible with yourself.
I promise I didn't plant this question or answer. You talked a lot about fun, and to those who listen to the podcast regularly, they know that this is something I like to harp on, and the implementation of fun, or the focus on fun, is huge. And I've read an Instagram post today, and I'm blanking on who it came from. Oh, it was Dakota Jones, a professional trail runner. He posted basically exactly what you just said, and that he's having more fun in his training. And oh, by the way, his results are better than ever before. And it's so fun to see the relationship between like easing off on the rigidity and actually achieving better results. Out here in Boulder, I'm friends with a lot of professional runners, and I see them not just in their running settings, but like at the restaurant or at bars or like eating pizza and like doing these things that conventionally, or they don't seem like something that a professional runner would do, but it's what enables them to be sustainably excellent in their pursuit of progress. And that's really been my biggest takeaway from this. Is going to be episode, 255. That's been my biggest takeaway from the last 200 episodes, that those who achieve objective measures of success are having the most fun.
Absolutely.
and they're doing it with their community, and they have a life outside of running, and they eat the extra piece of pizza, or they, whatever it is, there's an allowance for that type of thing, and the ability to enjoy it, right? Your shirt says Mindful Miles. Your company is Mindful Miles. Talk to me about the selection of that phrase and how it may or may not relate to this.
Yeah, it relates directly to this, because I was the textbook runner that, when we first met, I joked around with you that I was like, listen, I was never elite. I was never sub-elite. I consider myself like pretty good amongst the average runners. But when I was in high school and college, which is when I was at my highest performance, I never hit my max capacity. I never hit my true potential, because I couldn't let myself off the hook. I could not have fun, because it was constantly thinking about the, sports science and the nutrition and all of these things, and the factors of, what time I go to bed, what time I wake up, what types of shoes am I wearing, how am I sitting, all of these things that, yes, it factors in, but come on. If you're not enjoying what you're doing, you could do everything perfectly. And if your mindset isn't there, then what's it worth? And so that's really where Mindful Miles came about. So after I graduated college, I, like most student athletes and like most people, like recent college grads, you kind of just fall off this cliff and you're like, what's next? What am I supposed to do now? And it was a bit exciting to me, because I was like, cool, I don't have scheduled runs and scheduled lifts, and I can do whatever I want whenever. And then I realized I had been holding a lot of bitterness towards the sport for a really long time. And so I did absolutely nothing. I didn't run probably for about a year. And when I decided to come back to it, it was almost like, when you're going through a breakup and you get a text from your ex and you're like, do I want to go down this road again? Like, I don't know. And for me, it was around August, which is when you typically report for preseason. And I was driving to work and I saw some people running, and I was just like, man, I miss that. I really, really miss that. But I don't know how to return to it in a way that is healthy and sustainable for me, because I've never known that. So I promised myself, I said, listen, it's not paying your bills anymore. You have a job. Nobody cares if you run. So let's just have fun. Let's do whatever the heck you want. No training plans, nothing. And I was mind blown, because I started running faster and further than I ever had before. And I was like, I don't have a coach. I'm not following a plan. I don't get what's going on. And it all boiled down to the fact that I was having fun again. I was letting myself off the hook. And so I was like, all right, well, we have to, there's some sort of science to this. There's not science to it. It's just have fun. But then, so fast forward a couple more years, the pandemic hit. I was working in tech at the time. I was working from home. I was so lonely, and I was just craving that camaraderie, that community that you find in the running community. But obviously none of us could really do that. And so I threw up on an Instagram post like, hey, like, if I don't know, would anyone be interested in like training for a 5K program, maybe say 8 weeks, I'll write training plans if people are interested, whatever. And a lot of people said yes. So I was like, okay, I guess we're all virtually training for a 5K together. And the company has since evolved very much so since the days of training for a 5K, but it all started under the umbrella of let's stay mindful. Let's continue to move in a way that feels uplifting and supporting. And yes, some days hard because we do need to push ourselves. But at the end of it, let's just make sure we're having fun, because running's never going to pay our bills. So if it can't add to our life, then what are we doing?
You said something in there, 2 words that I want to call out. Nobody cares. My friend Laura Green has become Insta famous for this, and she's got stickers and stuff that say "nobody cares" as related to your finishing time of a marathon. Your 3:23 is your best day ever. That might never be possible for someone else, or that might be the slowest marathon that somebody's ever run. Like, the number itself is completely meaningless outside of that context of this is the fastest you've ever done it, or what did the journey to that 3:23:07 look like. I spoke with someone, India Cook, who was chasing a sub 7 hour finish at New York City Marathon. To her, 6:59 was like the holy grail. On the flip side, there are people who would be unsatisfied with a 2:35 or a 2:19 or a 2:04. Like, it's so meaningless outside of that context, and that's the fun part about it, right? I joked, I was on a run with a group here in Boulder a few months ago, and I must have tweeted a couple of years ago that I was training for a sub 2 marathon, because somebody was like, hey, aren't you the guy that tweeted that your marathon goal is breaking 2? And I was like, yeah, because unless your marathon goal is breaking 2, the number alone is completely without context. And the only way that you can have context is if it's literally the fastest ever. A very long tangent to say, I loved what you said there, and the way that you're approaching the training, both personally and as the group or with the coaching. How do you get newer runners or new to you runners to see it in that way, where this obsession with times is actually counterproductive for the majority of runners? And that's my hot take, that if you stop obsessing over the time, you'll hit the time.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's coming back to, what does the time mean to you? What does it represent? And is that the only goal? Because listen, I have time goals. I like to chase, A goals, B goals. But if we're going for the time alone, it's kind of shallow, isn't it? Like, there's so much more that comes with it. And so I always say, if someone comes to me and they're like, I want to train for a marathon, I'm like, that's fabulous. Can we make that a milestone instead of the end goal? Can this be part of your running journey instead of your entire running story? And so the way that I view it and the way that I like to reframe it is, let's let your fitness decide where you fall. Very similar to weight loss, actually. Like, I'm not an advocate for weight loss. If your body needs to lose weight, I firmly believe that it will lose the weight that it needs to. But bringing it back to running, let's let your fitness decide where it needs to fall. If your tempo pace is, I don't know, an 8-minute mile today, but next week you go out and you're having a great time and you run 7:30s, well, maybe it's time to increase your tempo pace. I don't know. And I think it's really just continuing to chase the feeling, continuing to make sure that you're in it for the right reasons, and letting the outcome just decide itself. Because if you can show up and say, I'm going to run fast today because I know what fast feels like, then that's really exciting, because then you get to those mile markers or you get to that finish line and you're like, Okay, so today fast for me means, whatever the watch says. And I think it's a really great way for us to connect back into our bodies and where we're at again in these seasons of life, because fast means various things for me and you. And how we can kind of appreciate where we're at with what we have rather than saying, well, I'm significantly slower than I used to be, so I'm not going to be happy until I reach this, this time mark again. It's like you may never reach that time mark again, or you may have to sacrifice a lot of things to get to that point, at which point it may not be worth it for you. So can we find the feeling? And similar to, I hear this a lot in a bunch of walkers, runners, and people that are new to the sport is, oh, well, I ran a 5K, but I'm slow, or I'm not as fast as you. And it's such a relative term, because what does slow mean to you versus me? I know what it feels like to run a mile, to run 10 miles without stopping. And that's a pretty empowering feeling. And I bet you know what that feels like too. You can tap back into one of those first times you did it. And so let's return to the joy of the sport in which we have common feelings rather than comparing our paces and our times to each other, because there's no joy in that.
Right, totally. It's interesting the way you framed that. I've not thought about it in that way. Like getting back to the feeling. You talk about like letting the fitness decide what the short-term goal might be, which might be the race time. My fastest marathon was a marathon I signed up for 6 weeks in advance because I was fit, and my coach said, "You're fit. Do you want to race a marathon? We'll do a little training block and then a taper, and then you'll race." And I ran 2:59 on that day, and that felt fast and that felt joyful, and I screamed at the finish line. And
that's
like
incredible.
And that's the art of the art and science of coaching, right? He knew that I was really fit. He knew that I was in a really good place mentally to approach an abridged training cycle, or marathon specific cycle. And then we raced, and the outcome was what I had been chasing for 4 years prior to that.
And so did you go into the race thinking you would hit that 2:59, or were you just like, let's see what happens?
Both. My fitness was like 250 low to 305 on the day, according to my coach, David. And I split that basically right in the middle. And it was fascinating because I was like perfectly on pace for 12 to 15 miles. And then I slowed down and I was like, I didn't come this far to screw it up now kind of a thing. And it was very much a like lean into the discomfort, and this is a privilege that you get to hurt this bad. And so again, it was entirely feelings and emotion based that I was able to make that happen. And so it's just fascinating how the mind works. And I guess that's why I have a podcast that's aimed at exploring this exact topic, because I'm so curious, like how can the mind override feelings sometimes?
Mm-hmm.
Like, again, most of us are not making money running. We can walk off the race course at any point in time and listen to discomfort when it tells us to stop, but we don't. And so it's particularly interesting for those who aren't being paid to do it, or like must continue after the race shuts down in order to finish. Like those stories are so fascinating of like, why the hell are you doing this kind of a thing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's incredible too, because, and that's what's so special about the sport is, again, it's that shared feeling of no one's forcing me to be here. I can leave, I can opt out at any time, but this is about something so much bigger than the run that I'm in. Like, I'm finding out who I am and who I'm going to show up, like what's going to make me show up, and how I want to be perceived and how I want to remember these moments. And so it really forces you to look in the mirror and say, like, how do you want to remember this moment? Do you want to just go all out, or do you want to enjoy it and have fun and not hit that pain cave, because that's not what we're into today?
So the next obvious question is, so who are you and how do you want to show up?
Yeah. It's a great question. So I am nearly 6 months pregnant right now with my second child. So I am struggling with the identity of calling myself a runner, which is something that I have struggled with for life because I've never considered myself a consistent runner. And I'll actually say consistent with air quotes because I think the term of consistent is so funny because it's the same conversation we just had of being a fast versus a slow runner. Like what consistent means to me is not what it means to you, and it doesn't make either right or wrong. And so this time around, I'm really focusing on taking the pressure off of myself of saying I need to train or I need to do X, Y, Z because, what if I want to run Boston postpartum, or what if I want to do, I'm really focusing on meeting myself where I'm at right now and being where my feet are and just kind of saying, how are we going to approach movement today?
If you've been enjoying this podcast and can spare 90 seconds of your time today, can you do me a favor? Can you pop over to Apple Podcasts and leave a review? It helps other people find and enjoy the podcast too. Thanks so much. This episode of For the Long Run podcast is sponsored by Puma. For 75 years, Puma has been pushing sports and culture forward with innovative design and development. We are honored to have Puma supporting this show and supporting the running community at large. My greatest compliment for running shoe is, I didn't think about it once. The purpose of having the right gear is to enable you to do anything you want out there. When I'm running in Puma's DV8 Nitro First Mile, all I'm thinking about is literally anything else. I think about the community, I think about why trying hard things is so rewarding, think about how cute Alfie is, and I think about how much I love tacos, and I think about the big things like how I want to leave each place I inhabit better than I found it. You know what I'm not thinking about? What's on my feet. And that's the best thing about Puma running shoes. They're designed to help you get out there effortlessly so you don't have to worry about what's on your feet. Just need to worry about putting one foot in front of the other. Check out a pair for yourself at puma.com and use the code FORTHELONGRUN, all one word, for 20% off. Again, when you support Puma, you're supporting me and the rest of the podcast team. Thanks again to Puma for supporting us. Is it a good market to buy a home in? What about to sell a home? What even goes on in the housing market? How do you even keep track? Well, good news for you, you don't have to know all the answers if you're interested in buying or selling your home, because you can just work with the best realtor around, Lauren Daniels. Whether you're thinking of buying or selling your home, Lauren is your go-to. She treats every client with care and helps make what could be a very scary process, dare I say, fun. Lauren helps you get organized and stay on top of important deadlines and guides you towards the right home for you instead of pushing you towards something that doesn't feel right. Even if you're not ready yet or you're not in the Denver or Boulder area, we highly recommend following Lauren on Instagram because she's always sharing great information about the housing market. Give her a follow at lauren.in.colorado on Instagram. And if you're already ready to start the conversation, give her a shout at ldaniels@milehighmodern.com and let her know we sent you. That's ldaniels@milehighmodern.com. How did you get to that point? Is it forced in that you're 6 months pregnant and you don't really have another option, or I'm going to shut up now. I'm curious.
Yeah, I got to this point because, like I've mentioned in the past, I have a history with disordered exercise and disordered eating. And I remember when I was in my early 20s, just kind of really hitting rock bottom and saying, I can't do this anymore. Like, I cannot hate my body anymore. And I kind of formed a pact with myself since then. And it's less under the umbrella of self-love, because some days that can feel like bullshit too. But it's basically saying, listen, I don't have to love you every day. I don't have to like you every day, but I promise not to hate you every day, because that is a feeling I never want to return to. And so it's been the constant practice of saying, okay, how am I feeling as it relates to body image, as it relates to movement, as it relates to whatever's going on in my life, meeting myself where I'm at and just being super honest. Like, I'm feeling slow. I'm feeling big. I'm feeling tired. I'm feeling whatever those negative emotions are, and calling them out within myself and saying, okay, what's wrong with being in a bigger body? Do you feel ill, or is that, internalized fat phobia coming out? And you have to sit with that discomfort. You have to have those hard conversations with yourself and say, there's nothing wrong with being in a bigger body right now, or there's nothing wrong with being slower, or there's nothing wrong with the fact that I haven't gone on a run in over a week. because I'm focusing on other things. I'm trying to do XYZ, or I'm approaching an off season, or whatever that looks like. And so it's been a very long journey, and I can't say that, like, I'm fully intuitive when it comes to movement, and I'm fully mindful, but compared to who I was last year, 5 years ago, it's we've come a long way.
That's awesome. This is a plug for the latest Nobody Asked Us podcast with Des and Kara, and a suggestion that if this conversation is resonating with you, go listen to their conversation with Lauren Fleshman. It's episode 4 of their podcast. I haven't listened to it. I was talking, it came out, I think, yesterday or today. I was talking with my girlfriend about it, and she's had her own experience in this area, and basically said, like, I wish I could have listened to this podcast 15 years ago or 20 years ago. And I was chatting with Kara about it, and she said it's super hard, but the more of these conversations that exist, the more it normalizes that this is a universal experience, and that's useful, but creating action from that and enabling people to make better decisions to help other people grow and change, versus just feeling like you're a part of a group of people who has all had a shared experience. Like, let's actually change it for the next generation so that we don't have to have the same conversation in 20 years.
Exactly. And I think the more that we can talk about it and take the shame away from it, and understand that it's not just me that's gone through this, like you said, it by normalizing it, I hope that with future generations, it makes the population of women and young girls who go through this smaller and smaller and smaller, to the point where it's, hopefully non-existent.
If someone's listening and they're like nodding along, like, hey, this is me, I'm going through this, what's your advice to that person?
Yeah, I think if I need more clarification, but I know this is a general person with that's asking. So I would say, ask yourself where this started. Did it start with movement? Did it start through a relationship? Did it start when you were a young girl because people that in your home were also picking themselves apart? And how are you perpetuating that today? Oftentimes it is through movement, and it's really tough because movement is this one thing that we love, but it's also this one thing that can take so much from us too. And so if that's the case, I would say, can you explore different types of movement? Can you look to break up with some of the elements of control that come with movement, specifically running? So if that's Strava, if that's comparing yourself to other people's Instagram stories, if that's constantly checking your pace because you just need to hit a certain target, maybe running without your watch is a little too much, but can you turn it inside so that you're not looking at it every time your watch buzzes? Can you turn the notifications off? Can you take one step that makes you feel a little bit uncomfortable, but deep down would probably be best if that step was taken away?
The removal of paces or running without a watch is interesting. I've ebbed and flowed on with motivation a bit over the last year, and I find two things help dramatically, that they work every single time. One is leaving the watch at home, or just not starting the run. And the most bizarre thing with that is, if you're wearing a watch and you didn't start it and you hit a stoplight, reaching to pause a non-started watch is a bizarre, like, you realize how addicted you are to capturing the data and capturing it accurately. And then the other piece, that if you're an extrovert, run with someone. And like, when I need it, I stack my weeks with friends to like add that fun aspect. I know it's a little tangential to what you were saying, but I think it can help as well, about like focusing on things other than the numbers, because I think that's where a lot of the obsession or comparison or whatnot comes into play. And so it's a good distraction.
I think it's really just, can you get to the point where you're curious with your feelings, because feelings are flashlights into something that we need to explore. So for me, my coach this past marathon training cycle, Jess, would program in a lot of time-based runs, which was excellent. If I needed to go slower, I could. If I was feeling good, I could go faster, whatever. And I remember, say it was like a 30-minute run, like most people, you finish and it's like 2, 0.4, 0.6 away from hitting that round mile. And so I would run until I hit it. And then I was like, why does the thought of not hitting a round mile make me so anxious? And I forced myself. If it's 2.87, we're leaving it at 2.87. We do not need to get to 3 miles. And it was sitting in that discomfort of like, I need to get to 3, and then really stopping and saying like, what will 2.87 versus 3 for someone who's just an average runner do for my fitness? Not much. Like, it's really the experience of sitting in that discomfort is more important for my mental fitness than getting that point mile for my physical fitness.
So I'm curious about your take on the following. So my coach often assigns runs based on time in a base building period, and then moves to miles with a range. So sometimes it's 4 to 6, sometimes it's 8 to 10 for weekday miles. And he knows when my motivation is waning, when I don't hit the low end of the range. So like I had a couple of runs last week where it was like 7.8 of an 8 to 10 mile range.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a conversation because I wasn't hitting the low end. And it's like, it's 2 minutes. The miles are so meaningless, or the fractions of miles are so meaningless. But to him, it's a flag of, you don't have 2 more minutes to commit to this run. And a line he uses is like, how you do, or maybe it's definitely not his line, how you do something is how you do everything. So like getting 90% of the way there, getting 90% of the way there, 85%, et cetera. So I'm curious your thoughts on something like that, and how it fits into the, like, again, the 0.2 doesn't matter. It's the relationship with the run, or it's the relationship with motivation at that current time that I'm curious about.
So I think we're talking about 2 different mindsets right now, 2 different people, because your current situation is that of, I have a big goal I want to reach. How you do something is how you do everything. Brick by brick, this is how we build a champion. That's great. And that's where you need that tough love from a coach to be like, okay, what's going on? Like 0.2 miles, like what's going on? We need to talk deeper. For me, it was coming from, and this was a conversation that I did have to have with my coach, of saying like, I'm getting to that point where I feel like I'm starting to control again, and it's bringing me anxiety. We need to bring the fun back into the run. And so it was saying like, okay, I have that brick by brick mentality, but it's not serving me right now because I'm still trying to heal this race anxiety. I've gotten to a point where I enjoy running, but racing and training for something is still that element of control, and taking it too far is too much for me. And so that's where I'm like, yes, if I showed up, because that 0.2 over the course of, compounded, that's a significant chunk of time, mental energy, all of these things. For me, it's saying I can skip that 0.2 and still show up to the race, still be in shape, and still have fun. So we're talking about 2 different things and 2 different mindsets of where you and I and different people are in their training.
Isn't that cool? How it's
so cool.
Just such a different experience for different people. I didn't think about it in that way.
Yeah. And you and I could, we can't, but in theory, you and I could hit the same volume every single week, and we will never have the same experience.
That's totally true. Yeah. It's again, and that's where the number is meaningless comes into play. Because for someone, a 4-hour marathon is super easy, and for someone else, they have to put in tons of work in order to get there. I love that about running. I had a conversation with Peter Bromka, who's been chasing the Olympic trials qualifying time for years, and he's like, slower runners often have more interesting stories because they're like, it's more than just the time. And if you think about it, the chasing of times is so freaking arbitrary. Like with OTQ, someone decided it's 218 and 237. Sub 3, that's just a number. It's not like what's your fitness and improve it by 10%. And the fact that if you look at marathon finishing times, the chunking of finishing times that occurs in like 255 to 3 and 355 to 4, and then you go further 100-mile times, like 23 hours to 24 hours, and 1 hour under whatever the cutoff is. Like, it doesn't matter what the cutoff is. A popular hour will be 1 hour under it. The way that we use our mind to chase these completely arbitrary times that are so unrelated to our fitness is silly.
It's wild how tied our ego is to our times as well. Like, that was something I really had to explore over the summer when I was training, because I was running slower training times than I ever had. And I don't typically like to share my paces because I don't want someone to compare and be like, your slow is so fast or your slow is very slow. But this is a podcast for runners and we all kind of get it. So my training times during the week were probably like 10 to 11 minute miles. And it was really hard for me to sit in that and not make it mean anything about me. Because when I was showing up for my speed workouts, my long run speed workouts, I was ripping. I was recovering so well. And like, I know this is a huge thing that we're all talking about is like slow down. But it did so much for me in the sense that like my volume was lower. I still PR'd. I still had fun. I didn't have like nothing. There were no horror stories from the day, from the training cycle, any of it. And the fact that I was able to get to a place where I was running very slow, almost like it feels like I'm describing a video game, but it almost helped me achieve this additional layer of mindfulness where I could really just be. Like, it was that flow state, but significantly, like, very, very much so different than when you're just like flying and you're cruising. It was just, it really just helped me stay in my body. Whereas I think when you and I get that runner's high, we're just like out in la la land, and you wake up and you're like, what did I just do? So that was definitely, it was an interesting experience for me.
My favorite feeling is that flow state where you just like blink and you've run 10 miles. I know that I'm in a good place training wise. So the highest volume I progress to is like an 8 to 10 mile easy run around my Wednesday workout. So 8 to 10 on Tuesday and Thursday. And I know that when that Tuesday 10 miler just like clicks and it's over, that's when I know I'm just like, there's something magical that's happening. And that's why I train. I don't care about the numbers anymore at this point. Like, I've run a 259. My goal to break 3 hours took 4 years. And if that's my fastest lifetime marathon, like, I'm completely satisfied with that time. But more importantly, the process of achieving that time. But to me, it's more interesting to get to a place where you're hitting that flow. And some of that is from like slowing down and adding fun and all these things. And yet again, like, the best races often happen when you're in that place. So to me, it's like, how do we strive to achieve flow? I think episode 5 or 6 of this podcast was with Magdalena Boulay, VP of innovation at Goo Energy Labs, and an Olympian and incredible athlete herself, incredible human herself. She's like, I train for flow. I train for those moments where everything just feels effortless, and easy miles or hard miles are flowy, etc. And I'm just like getting goosebumps thinking about like how great that feeling is. And it's funny because new runners hear about this and they're like, I don't understand what you're talking about. I've had coworkers who are like, why do you run so much? It sounds horrible. And then they start running and they're like, this is horrible. I'm just like, wait 3 weeks.
Right.
It will all make sense in 3 weeks. And like, I literally got a message from a colleague, Dallin, a year ago or so now. He's like, dude, I get it. I started running and yeah, I see it. And to someone who's listening, And they're like, I never experience flow. My feedback is aim for consistency and eventually it will happen.
Yeah, just keep showing up. And I think like we're coming off the holidays, and anytime I'm with my in-laws, we do puzzles together. So this is what's coming up for me. But it's like starting a puzzle. You throw 1,000-piece puzzle on a table and you're looking at all these pieces and you're like, do I really want to do this right now? And little by little, you start to see patterns, and then you get excited and you're like, okay, I see it starting to come together. And so back to running, for some people, that's 3 weeks. For some people, it's 3 months. But like, you need to trust that like the puzzle will come together, and you're going to understand why so many people lace up day after day. And it's because of that flow state that you hit that you really can't get. Like, I mean, you tell me, Jonathan, like where else in your life can you get something like that? Because at work, like you know, like you work for a promotion, or you work to help your coworkers or be seen or whatever. And then in a relationship, like you're kind of in it together, but in running, it's just you and you. And I don't know, maybe that's why we keep showing up.
The puzzle will come together. I love that. So you asked where else in life does that occur? I think the only place it occurs is when you are creating something. Mm-hmm. I look at creating fitness as checking that box. And I also look at like this podcast as checking that box. Like if you had told me 4 years ago when I started this, what it looked like today, I'd say you're nuts. That's not my podcast. And there's no way that I did that mm-hmm. or that we did that. And it's the same thing. Like you step back and it's 1,000 pieces later, there's something interesting here. And that's true. Again, I think that's only true in the aspect of creation. I've worked at Inside Tracker for 8.5 years now. And it's the same thing, right? Like 8 years ago, if I saw what we were doing today, I'd say you're nuts. Or maybe I wouldn't. I'd say, yeah, obviously we made it that far. But it's the same thing that brick by brick by brick, puzzle piece by puzzle piece, etc. That's the only way to do interesting things. Nothing, we can just go on with metaphors about success, like an overnight success 10 years later, kind of exactly. A deal, right? But again, that's why there's an Outside Magazine article that outlines why endurance athletes make the best employees, because we understand this. You can't eat an elephant in one bite, or
start with the end in sight.
The beach is made up of 1 billion different grains of sand. Like all of these metaphors about bite by bite by bite by bite.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's true.
So switching gears a little bit, something I like to ask people who have had interesting life experiences or some sort of struggle along the way, which I guess is everyone. If you could rewind or talk to yourself 10 years ago, what would Sara of 2023 say to Sara of 2013?
Oh, I mean, you can guess this one.
Say it.
Have fun. Stop being so hard on yourself. Seriously, have fun. And that's, I love that you asked that question, because this is something I ask myself all the time when I am getting to that headspace where I'm just like so stressed about training, life, business, anything like that. I say, this time next year, this time 2 years from now, when I look back on this, what would I have said to myself? And it's always like, it's going to work itself out. You just need to do like what feels in alignment for you. So stop making it about eating an elephant in an entire day or finishing the puzzle in 10 minutes and have fun with it. Because sure, maybe you can finish the puzzle in 10 minutes, but like then you're going to get competitive with people. No one's going to invite you back to do puzzles. Like, so really just whatever fun means for you. And if that means elbowing people to get the puzzle done, then I sure go for it. But
amazing. Sara, this has been a blast. Thank you so much for taking some time to chat today and sharing more about your mindful miles and so much more.
Thank you for having me. It's been great to connect.
Of course. Where can people find you on your corner of the internet?
Best place to come find me is on Instagram. It's I am Sara Hayes. I've got a link in bio that gives you all the other information that you can find myself, Mindful Miles, the other Mindful Miles athletes, all of those things.
Awesome. Thanks so much, and we'll see you out there.
Thanks, Jonathan.
That's it for today's episode. Like many long runs, it's sad when it has to end. I hope you join in next time on For the Long Run, and in the meantime, happy trails. If you enjoyed this episode, it would mean a lot to me if you shared it so that others can find it and enjoy it too. This podcast and the accompanying music has been produced by Brian Walters of Single Track Sound. For the Long Run's logo was created by Vanessa Wolf of Sterling Wolf. Show notes have been written by Ruby Wiles and is managed by Emily Holland. It takes a village.